Hi, this is Don Barry, and I'm calling this 3 Minutes Without Mike today. You know, many of us here in Chester and in the surrounding areas are very familiar with floods. Just 10 days ago, the mighty Mississippi was over the road right here. Man has tried to control the water with levees and dams, and while successful for a time, eventually they will seem to fail and the mighty waters take control. You see, man is at the mercy of its force. The most recent records, which are from 2019, says that 92 people in the United States lost their lives due to flooding. Most of them here in the Midwest, along the Missouri and the Mississippi and Arkansas rivers. According to, gosh, I hope it didn't break it.
Oh, no, it was already broken.
Man is at the mercy of the river's force. In 2019, 92 people in the United States lost their lives due to flooding. Most of them right here in the Midwest, along the Mississippi, the Missouri, and Arkansas rivers. According to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, in 2019, flooding cost $14 billion in damages. 14 million Americans were impacted, while 200 million were at risk. Kind of makes you wonder how the great flood Noah endured must have been. You know, many of us have visited the Creation Museum and the Ark near Cincinnati, Ohio. And to me, Ken Ham, who created that whole thing, may be one of the best and biggest authorities on the Great Flood. Yet, there are still people today who scoff at the idea that the whole world was flooded. Well, recently, Ham was questioned by a non-believer who wondered if it truly happened. And then he asked, why don't we find human fossils among the rock layers around the world if there was really a flood? Where are all the fossils of the pre-flood humans? First of all, we need to look at Genesis 1:21, which says, "And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after its kind. And God saw that it was good." Now, what this verse tells us is there were already oceans and seas for the great creatures like whales to live in. Ham says we must understand the nature of the flood itself. It was much more than just a 40-day rainstorm. Genesis 7:11 says that the fountains of the great deep broke open. In other words, earthquakes, volcanoes, and geysers of molten lava and hot scalding water were squeezed out of the Earth's crust in a massive, violent upheaval. These fountains didn't stop until 150 days into the flood. So the Earth's surface was literally a churning mass underneath the floodwaters for about 5 months. The duration of the flood was extensive. And we think, well, Noah was only on the ark 40 days. That was the length of the rain. The flood was extensive, and Noah and his family were on board the ark for over a year. God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through him. I will destroy them with the earth." So let's get back to the question about fossils. Approximately 95% of all fossils are shallow marine organisms, which are things such as coral and shellfish. Then 95% remaining are of that 5% are algae, plants, and invertebrates, which includes insects. And then the very small 0.25% are actually vertebrates. Now, most of those are fish. And 99% of those consist of only one bone. Most mammal fossils are likely from after the flood itself. To understand it better, Mr. Ham explains, if we were to walk from the floor of the Grand Canyon, it's a walk not through evolutionary time, but instead it is like a walk from the bottom of the sea, across the tidal zone, over the shore, across the lowlands, and into the upper regions, except the creatures are buried up on the continent. And the flood layers represent less than a single year of accumulation. In the turmoil of the Great Flood, humans and land animals would have simply been swept away and eventually would have drowned. This probably didn't happen quickly, though. They would have tried to escape. That's human nature. But eventually, they would have died. Their bodies, unfortunately, would have bloated and would have either been eaten by the creatures swimming in the sea, or they would have decomposed and composted naturally and eventually washed ashore after the flood. A few larger animals, therefore, would not be found. Now, evolutionists believe all this is due to millions of years of the Earth's history and the slow and gradual evolution. But creationists believe the order in fossil records exists due to the flood. Fossils are therefore a testimony to the rapid burial of the sediment in the watery cataclysm of billions of organisms. And this is why we find layers of mudstone, or we call it shale, siltstone, sandstone, and limestone. You see them all along the bluffs of the mighty Mississippi. They would have been formed as the floodwaters subsided, and larger animals would have been the last to perish, and they would not have been buried in the deeper layers of the flood. So what does all this mean to us? Well, one day when we're in heaven, we're going to find out from God himself how all this transpired. Until then, what I think is we need to put our trust in God. There will always be scoffers at his holy word. There will always be doubters and naysayers that any of what we know to be true from the Bible is just fairy tales. I put my trust in him because I believe it is the true and accurate word of God. And if we could understand it, we would all be better off. But God didn't make it easy to understand. So this has been our few minutes. I would like to invite you all to come to First Baptist this week as we celebrate the most holy of weeks, the week of Easter. Now, Maundy, Thursday, we will begin at 7 o'clock at our church. Friday evening at 7 o'clock, our worship team and others will join in with the worship team out at Grace, and we will have a joint Good Friday service. Saturday, we'll have our usual 5 o'clock service in the evening, and then on Easter Sunday, you can find us at the gazebo at 7 a.m. in the morning. Following that service there, come down to our church. We're going to have breakfast for the first time in over a year. That breakfast time will run from 7:30 till 8:30, where another service will be held in the auditorium at the church. And then, of course, our regular 10:30 service will be there as well. We're doing all these because we want to reach out to you during this special time of year. Please come and join us. Thanks.